Could you please take your seats so we can get underway? Okay, good morning, bonjour, and welcome to this morning's Open Caucus, focusing on restorative justice. I'm Art Eggleton, Senator from Toronto, and beside me is my co-chair, Senator Raymond Saint-Germain from Quebec. The Open Caucus is a forum for discussion on issues of national importance, and it's co-sponsored by the Independent Senators Group, ISG, the Independent Senate Liberals, and the Government Representative Office in the Senate, all together representing a majority of the senators. This nonpartisan discussion is open to all parliamentarians, staff, media, and the public. I want to also note that in addition to senators and, of course, our guest speakers today, I want to welcome Arif Rani, who's the Member of Parliament for Parkdale High Park. He's also the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
Thank you, sir.
Here, he's up here. Arif, thank you for coming.
Sure.
Now, restorative justice, also known as RJ, everything has to have an acronym, I guess, has been advocated as a potential solution to mitigate the current issues facing the criminal justice system. RJ focuses on repairing harm, healing in victims, meaningful accountability of offenders, and preventing further crimes. While research suggests that the use of RJ can result in higher satisfaction for all parties involved, increased efficiency, lower legal costs, and effective rehabilitation programming as compared to traditional criminal justice, in spite of that, over half of Canadians reported a low familiarity with the topic. Not obviously for the people out in the audience. We've got a big audience of people that know something about this, I'm sure. Without a basic awareness, RJ's full potential cannot be realized. So today we ask 5 panelists, what are the implications of using RJ as an additional alternative or complementary form of justice? Can RJ programs provide better justice for victims, for offenders, and for society as a whole? Now, just a couple of logistics points. If you want coffee or tea, it's right at the back of the room. Also, for our audience, translation from French to English, English to French can be found in headsets located at your chair. My colleagues all know this is how it works. Anyway, Channel 1 is for English, Channel 2 is for French. Now, we also, and I address the people in front of me, welcome audience participation. We have a microphone right in the middle for that purpose. So if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, you can have up to 3 minutes to do that. All you have to do is let the Open Caucus coordinator, Sarah Paulowin, know that. Sarah is right there. Sarah, actually, the last time we had an Open Caucus meeting, she was Sarah Daly, but she got married during the summer, so she's now Sarah Paulowin. Same person, though, and doing a magnificent job of coordinating all of this. With that, let me turn it over to my co-chair, Raymond Saint-Germain.
Thank you, co-chair, for the last time. It is sad. Alors, bonjour et bienvenue. La justice réparatrice, c'est un sujet de la plus haute importance, notamment dans le contexte de la crise des délais judiciaires, mais pas seulement dans ce contexte-là. Les initiatives de justice réparatrice sont issues en partie d'une critique du système de justice pénale. Bien qu'il n'existe aucune approche normative de la justice réparatrice, les initiatives partagent une même philosophie qui est axée sur le redressement du tort causé par l'acte criminel, en tenant le délinquant responsable de ses agissements, en offrant aux parties touchées par l'acte criminel la possibilité de satisfaire leurs besoins et d'obtenir un règlement qui se prête à la réparation, et en prévenant l'importance de la prévention d'autres actes criminels et des préjudices, et surtout une nouvelle victimisation. La plupart des mesures de justice réparatrice s'inspirent de deux grandes considérations: la participation active de toutes les parties au conflit, la souplesse de la procédure et des résultats. En bref, elles cherchent à compléter et, dans certains cas, à supplanter le traitement standard des litiges d'ordre pénal. À long terme, cependant, de nombreux tenants de la justice réparatrice entrevoient positivement le mouvement visant à revoir et finalement à redéfinir les conceptions conventionnelles de justice et de sanction. Et j'ajouterais que les services publics complémentaires de santé, services sociaux, services de réintégration sociale doivent aussi être partie des partenaires de tous les acteurs de la justice réparatrice. Alors, nos 5 panélistes ce matin ont beaucoup de choses à nous dire, des expériences diversifiées. Je les salue, je les remercie et sans plus tarder, nous allons leur laisser la parole.
Well, we have 5, and the first one up is Professor Luluin, who is professor at the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. Her teaching and research is focused in the areas of relational theory, restorative justice, truth commissions, international and domestic human rights law, and the Canadian Constitution law. Professor Llewellyn advises and supports a number of projects and programs using a restorative approach in Nova Scotia and internationally. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I want to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to you both, Senators Eggleton and St. Germain, for the invitation to contribute to this open caucus, and to the rest of the senators for having this opportunity this morning. I think, in my view, it's an important and timely discussion, given the very significant potential for restorative justice in our current context. This includes effectively addressing delay, as was acknowledged by a not-too-distant Senate committee report on that issue, to increase greater access to justice. And by this, I mean not simply ensuring that people can access the courts more easily, but that the justice we have on offer and the processes through which we seek it might be improved. That we may be able to foster processes that are better able to take account of root causes and systemic issues in ways that I think are essential for addressing the issue of overrepresentation of marginalized peoples in the criminal justice system. It's also a really timely conversation because there's currently significant interest in both accelerating the development and growth of restorative justice across Canada and various provinces and territories, and a real need, I think, for a coherent national framework to support this development and access to justice in this way across the country. So one of the most significant and enduring challenges, I think, in advancing the growth and development of restorative justice is answering this perennial question, what is restorative justice? I think there's a significant temptation to just describe what the processes look like, and in so doing to treat restorative justice as if it is just a tool or a practice in the toolkit. I think restorative justice does indeed, and I suspect we will hear about this morning, offer alternative processes that seek to address the harmful effects of crime on individuals and their relationships. It is, however, I think, much more than just about a different way of getting justice done. It's a different way of understanding what doing justice actually requires. It starts from the recognition of the fundamental importance of relationship and connection to our well-being and safety. And so the goal of restorative justice is to achieve, protect, and maintain just social relations. And those are relationships in which parties all enjoy equal respect, can express mutual care and concern for one another's well-being, and respect for their human dignity. In the wake of harmful acts, as your introduction suggested, restorative justice looks to address the harm and to establish just relations in future. And this requires processes and practices that are up to doing this relational work. What this requires, though, will depend in terms of the exact shape of these practices and processes on the context, the circumstances, and the needs of the parties in a given situation. So there can be no one-size-fits-all RJ model or program. I think once we can think about restorative justice as an approach to justice, its potential for transformation of the criminal justice system comes clearer. It can absolutely be then seen as an alternative justice pathway. And I think that the difference this would make is it would challenge us not to simply treat our current criminal justice system as the default and then make justifications to divert to restorative justice. Instead, it would have us making reasonable and reasoned decisions about which pathway is most appropriate. And that would require some significant choices about why and how we would use our current criminal justice processes, as well as when to use restorative justice. I think restorative justice, understood as an approach to justice, also holds significant prospects for reforming processes within the criminal justice system. And we've seen some remarkable examples, and one of them was on the news on CBC last night from my home province of Nova Scotia, in terms of the innovations in mental health courts, in addiction, responses to addictions in court, and inside of correctional institutions and services. In the end, then, I think what a restorative approach to justice might do is offer an opportunity to transform how we think about what justice requires and then the system that we structure to achieve it. And so it has this potential to change the way that we think about and do criminal justice in Canada. I think to do that requires more than just a description of some practices. I think it's helpful for us to imagine what difference this might make by looking to the goals and objectives of restorative justice and thinking what would the system look like in totality if these were the goals and objectives that it adopted. Some resonate with our hopes for criminal justice now, and some would be a shift, I think, if they were the principles that underpinned restorative justice. So I won't dwell too long on these goals and objectives. They're on the screen, and I'll mention they are to respond to the needs of individuals and communities affected by crime, to really take a harm reduction focus to the criminal justice system, which invites us to think beyond the strict categories of victim and offender and to look for where there is harm, systemic and individualized, and address it, to support individual and collective taking of responsibility for where there is harm and threats to public safety, to increase access to justice, to provide more responsive justice, so to be more human-centered in terms of the response of our justice system and not centered on the needs of the system, to increase public confidence and accountability in the administration of justice by empowering people to be part of that justice system and build and support healthy communities. While I think there's much to be learned by looking at particular restorative justice processes and practices, and I would encourage us to do so, I think what they all share and what we should be looking for are the principles that underlie those particular models and make them restorative. And so I think if we want to imagine what a justice system working restoratively would look like, it would have to be a principle-based approach rather than just grabbing onto one model of victim offender mediation or of circles, but instead to look beyond those models to the way they're working. These principles include that restorative processes are relationally focused, so trying to pay attention to the relationships at play between the issues and the parties. They are comprehensive and holistic, taking into account histories, contexts, and causes of harms. They're inclusive and participatory. They need to be culturally responsive and trauma-informed. They're responsive, so they need to be flexible in their practice. They're focused on promoting individual and collective responsibility, so not only telling a story about criminal harms that rests with one individual or a harm to one individual, but considers our collective responsibilities and contributions to the conditions that create those harms. They're collaborative and non-adversarial and future-focused, which means they typically work in ways that utilize mechanisms that are more educative, problem-solving, preventative, and proactive rather than punitive. So my short answer to the question that you posed in your invitation to me about whether or not restorative justice is better justice is that I think it is, or certainly it can be, if it is approached in a principle-based way in terms of its integration with the criminal justice system. I think for at least 4 reasons. One is restorative processes are better able to tackle the kind of complex issues that are presenting themselves to the criminal justice system. They are better able to bring various perspectives and understandings to bear on addressing a situation and to understand those complex truths about what happened, about what matters about what happened, and about what we do about it together. If the truth often lies somewhere in the middle of complex relationships in these circumstances, our current criminal justice system all too often forces us to pick a side of that truth, and we don't fully understand the issues that way. Restorative processes offer a better experience, not only for those who are victims, but certainly are more inclusive where they've been excluded from the processes that deal with their harms, but also for those who have come into contact with the criminal justice system by virtue of existing traumas and inequalities. They have an opportunity for better outcome, because those involved can be involved in making the plan to make things better in the future. So we're very limited in what we can order people to do, as our compliance rates with the criminal justice system reveal. Compliance rates with restorative justice are much higher, and I think that's because the plans and decisions made within those processes are meaningful to the parties, and the appropriate supports are available for those plans to be carried out and make a difference in the lived lives of those most affected. And they can have broader effects. Restorative processes don't tell a story about crime that is overly simplistic and individualized. They can look at systemic factors, and the plans and outcomes of those processes can contribute to addressing systemic inequalities rather than merely dealing with the individual acts and impacts. So I won't spend time, because I think this might be maybe a future caucus about what I think needs to happen if we want to be supportive of accelerating this in Canada. I think more of this needs to happen, more conversations, deeper understanding. I think we do need to think about the need for a national framework so that there can be more consistent access rather than this competitive one-off funding of pilot initiatives that come and go and happen in disconnected ways across the country. I think there are ways in which legislation ought to be reformed so that the principles of a restorative understanding of justice are more embedded in the criminal justice system and drive decisions within that system. I think we need to think of restorative justice less as diversion and more as a significant alternative and meaningful justice pathway. And I think restorative justice reveals the importance of working for just relations across our various systems and services, so that we need to think about where are the conditions and structures for justice and injustice being established, and how do we bring a restorative approach to education, healthcare, and other areas where the work that now rests with the criminal justice system really belongs in securing just relations.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Llewellyn, et votre conclusion est presque un devoir. Vous nous avez donné, les réservant pour le futur, un certain nombre de pas à franchir qui paraissent très importants. Alors, si on peut en parler dès aujourd'hui, ce serait encore formidable. J'ai le plaisir maintenant de vous présenter Chantal Barker, qui est membre de la Nation Cri de Sapotowiac. Elle a étudié dans les domaines de la justice réparatrice et de la résolution des conflits. Elle est actuellement coordonnatrice en matière de développement de la justice pour la Southern Chiefs Organization Incorporated, qui représente 34 collectivités des Premières Nations du sud du Manitoba. Avant cela, Mme Barker a travaillé pendant 10 ans au ministère de la Justice du Manitoba comme agente de probation. Alors, merci d'être avec nous et à vous la parole.
All right. So good morning. My spirit name is Gichi Nodenekwe, and I'm from the Deer Clan. So if you would translate that in English, it means strong wind woman. And once you start to hear me present, you'll understand where I got my name from. I will try to slow it down, but I get very passionate about the work that I do in regards to justice area. So like you said, I'm from Southern Chiefs Organization, and the Grand Chief Jerry Daniels sends his greetings. Unfortunately, he couldn't attend because they're at Chiefs in Summit yesterday and today. But I'm here to present on behalf of our organization and our restorative justice program, as I was very instrumental in creating the framework of it. So who we are, Southern Chiefs Organization represents 34 First Nation communities in southern Manitoba and was established in 1999. Our mission statement is, "We, the Chiefs of Southern Manitoba, hereby agree to establish independent political forum to protect, preserve, promote, and enhance First Nations people inherent rights, languages, customs, and traditions through the application and implementation of the spirit and intent of the treaty-making process." So that's who we are. Who am I? I know where I come from. I know who I am. I know where I am going. I always do my presentations this way because it's a holistic way of presenting. So where I come from, prior to Southern Chiefs organization, I was with Manitoba Justice for 10 years in the capacity of a probation officer for the first 7 years. And then the last 3 years, I actually developed the culturally appropriate program that is recognized by Justice Canada as an evidence-based program, and is now implemented province-wide in Manitoba. It was also acknowledged in Crime Prevention Ottawa as an evidence-based, one of the top evidence-based programs in Canada. So what the Culturally Appropriate Program is a DVD series of myself teaching a group of inmates in Headingley Correctional Center their history, their culture, and their identity. It takes over four complete days, and it was evaluated, and it is the only court-mandated Indigenous program that is available through the justice system. So that's where I come from. I was also invited by Justice Canada in 2016 to present on the CAP program on a national webcast for Indigenous programming for youth. So that's where I come from. So I left the justice system because I learned how it worked. I really gained a lot of tools when I worked there. I was a case manager. I was a coach trainer for the case management. I was a coach trainer for the risk assessments. I was a coach trainer for the GLADU reports, and I was also a coach trainer for the PSRs. So I got a lot of training from Manitoba Justice, and then I left Manitoba Justice with all those tools to create our own Anishinaabe justice system. So that's where I am now, and that's where I am going, is taking all of that information. So prior to the last 2 years of my CAP career, or CAP tour, I crisscrossed across Manitoba to 45 First Nation communities. I went into every single correctional center, youth centers, including Stony Mountain, which is the federal center. I went into the ranges, I went into the floor, I went into the cells. I've been in every corner of the center. And what did I see there? Or who did I see? My people. And that is why I had to leave, and I said, because the system is not going in the right direction. We as Indigenous people have to take control of our own justice issues and start healing our own people. And that is where I am going. So the vision for SEO is that there are no Indigenous people incarcerated. When people say that, they say like, wow, what are you going to do with them? This is going to take 7 generations. It's going to take 7 generations because it took us 7 generations to get here. So it's going to take baby steps, but that is the end goal, and that is the vision. Because what the current system, it is based on punishment. And for Indigenous people, our form of justice was based on healing. So in order to get to a world we want to live in, we have to have a major paradigm shift, one that is 1 million years old. Russell Means. So what he is talking about is that we have to go back to the way things were prior to colonization. We got to go to our traditional forms of government that we used to maintain harmony within our communities. Because we did live in harmony, and we had systems in place, and we had restorative justice. So restorative justice for Indigenous people is not new, and it is something that is 1 million years old. So the Western punishment system does not work for Indigenous people. First Nations people knew that harmony was essential for Minipitasuan, which means the good life. And when people were acting out, traditionally, the elders would say that means they're not balanced. Something's going on within them, and we as a community have to come together in order to bring that balance back into their life. So that is why we used healing versus punishment. And the system now does not work for our people. I was a probation officer, and plus I did the CAP tour for 10 years, and I've heard thousands of stories from our people about how they've been impacted. And once you hear all of these stories, you start recognizing the patterns, the cycles of them going in, coming out. They go into the correctional center as innocent youth. They come out as gang members. They go into the system knowing how to break into a car. They know coming out how to hotwire a car. So really, does the incarceration really helping? So traditional justice system. So for Indigenous people of Turtle Island, restorative justice is our traditional justice model. Indigenous models of justice had more emphasis on healing and not punishment. The community members were empowered to run their own justice systems, and all community members were included. Indigenous communities had several methods to restore harmony, such as healing circles to address their emotional, sharing circles to address their mental, sentencing circles to address the physical, and ceremonial to address the spiritual. So with all of that experience and knowledge, I came into this position as the justice coordinator, and I revised our restorative justice department to be focused on holistic healing, because it was kind of status quo since the implementation of it. And with all of that, those skills that I've learned through the justice system, I came in and I revised our restorative justice department to be focused on healing, holistic healing. So restorative justice views criminal conflict as an injury to personal relationships and wellness and the disruption of harmony. Healing is focused for all involved. SCO Restorative Justice believes that the most unhealthy behaviors is the result of colonization, in particular the residential school effects, unresolved trauma, and/or addictions. And I should have also included poverty as well. SCO Restorative Justice focuses on culture as an important part of healing and is the foundation of the program. So a holistic approach. SCO-RJ focuses on healing the root causes of the behavior, addressing their current issues, allow them to learn from their mistakes, and make amends for their behavior. The program provides the client the opportunity to take responsibility and to make amends to the victim, their family, and their own family, as well as their community. Because everybody is impacted, and there's something that I've always said is I always say is the hurt of one is the hurt of all, but also the honor of one is the honor of all. The community members are empowered to be part of the process and have input regarding the healing plan. It provides an opportunity for the impacted person, families, and community members to identify the harms caused. Clients have the opportunity to repair the harm and the relationship. Oh, that's French. So SCO-RJ, Strong Restorative Justice Program, includes local community control. So in SCO, we have six community justice workers who work directly in the community. They work with and coordinate the Justice Committee meetings. They work with the Justice Committee. They attend regular community networking meetings, such as wraparound meetings, hub meetings that have all the resources in the community that all sit at one table. They provide workshops, programs, and cultural activities. SCO works closely with Chief and Council, the Elders Council, and the Community Justice Committee to ensure the program meets the community's vision. So even though SCO administers it, we always want to make sure that we're addressing what does the community want, because the community, every community is unique and it is different. We'll have a little bit differences, but the framework is very similar. So we do ongoing networking and partnerships. We have partnerships with the Manitoba First Nation Police Services, which used to be called DOPS, the Dakota Ojibwe Police Services. So we work with them now to start working together to address get those referrals in. We work with the SCO communities, Canada, Manitoba, MKO, and MMF. We have ongoing meetings with Crown attorneys and justice officials. So just this past summer, I actually met with Manitoba's Chief Justice and associates, as well as I provided training, cross-cultural training, to the Circuit Crown attorneys as well, to let them know what our program's about, but also to let them understand the impacts of colonization, but how to implement healing plans in their orders, or also to describe our healing plans, which I will get into. We provide regular updates to the Chief and Councils. We provide an annual update to the Chiefs and Summit, which I was just at yesterday. And we also provide an annual report and a written report. We attend community networking meetings. Oh, and there's the French. I took French, but I'm not gonna even try because it's been years since I have spoken it. So holistic healing. So this is kind of the case management model. It is, we are all connected. So we not only look at the impacts of the individual, the client, and the person and the victim, but we also look at the impacts of the family and the community, because everything has a ripple effect. And how I used to explain it, when you drop a pebble into a lake, it doesn't matter how long it takes. Eventually that ripple is going to ripple out, and every bank shore will feel that impact. And it's just like our own life. Everything that we do, every action has a reaction. So the medicine wheel is the framework of our case management tool, and that is because it is in a circle, and it also describes land-based teachings and our holistic world of how we viewed the world around us, that everything goes in cycles, everything has patterns, everything is interconnected, and everything must have balance. So our healing plan is based on the 4 elements of the medicine wheel. So case management, we have a holistic needs assessment. So they complete 20 questions, I should say 40 questions, 10 for physical, 10 for mental, 10 for emotional, 10 for spiritual. 5 of the questions are positive behaviors, 5 of the questions are negative behaviors. Then once they get their number on that assessment, then they jot it down on the medicine wheel, which I'll show. I don't know if I have it on here, but it's a graph of the medicine wheel where there's numbers. So if they have a -2 for physical, we jot it there. Then if they have a 4 for mental, we jot it there. If they have a 3 for emotional, their spirit usually is the highest one with a 4. So what we tell them is that we want to bring them back into balance. So the first thing they need to do is their lowest score, which is the physical, because it's in the minus. So then we empower the clients to say, okay, in order to bring that number up, you either could add some positive behaviors or eliminate some negative behaviors. So then it comes down to empowering them to make choices versus probation, where he said, you got to do this, this, and this. This is where we give them the option. But we know that once you start adding positive energy, it starts to diffuse the negative. So that's kind of, we also believe in positive and negative energy, and we implement this in our teachings. We have medicine wheel case plans. So once they're done the medicine wheel, the holistic assessment, it then is put into the medicine wheel case plan. So physical, okay, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to start exercising. I'm going to try quit drinking. I'm going to eat healthy. Mental, okay, what are you going to do? I'm going to go get programming. I'm going to try to get a job, employment, education, whatever they identify. Emotional, and this is where we put the mediation in, because that's the repairing of the relationship. So with the mediation, we said, okay, how are you going to make amends so that you're at peace with yourself? And then you could repair that relationship. So that's where the mediation with the victim of the family would go in, the emotional piece. And then the spiritual. How are you going to find your life purpose? What does it take for you to believe in yourself? Because that was one thing that spirituality, we had back and forth. Do we follow culture? Do we follow tradition? There's a religion. And I said, really, your spiritual is your own personal beliefs. It's your belief in yourself and the ones that your values that you hold, but also your purpose in life. So then we address that as well. So then, in conclusion, what we do is we come together as one. So we have the people in the middle, and then we have the community surrounding them. So that's when they take their healing plan, they go to the Community Justice Committee, and then the Justice Committee reviews the healing plan, and then they provide resources or support and say, okay, you need to get into a school. So who here is from education that could help them, guide them to get them back into school? You need counseling. Is there any elders that we can send them to in the community? So because we do have the resources in our communities, and they lie within our elders, and we have to bring those elders and bring them to the forefront and utilize their knowledge. So that is how we envision our program, is in a holistic community base and based on our culture, our worldviews, and our values. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. Very detailed program. That's good to hear from you. Next is Ryan Beardy, who's a Cree Salto from the Lake St. Martin First Nation. He has significant experience in the criminal justice system. He now co-parents his 2 children and is in his 2nd year at the University of Winnipeg studying political science and conflict resolution. Ryan?
Merci. Thank you, Miigwech. I'd like to first of all acknowledge that we're on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. I'd like to thank Senator Art Eggleton for inviting me to this important conversation, and thank the other senators for being here, and the members, public, the media, for taking part. I look around and see such an impressive panel. I'm very humbled to be here today. I met Pate and Sinclair. I must have shook his hand about 5 times. It took me a second to wonder, to realize my purpose here, perhaps my value in terms of contribution to this conversation. A lot of what I have to say is rooted in experience and personal account. I was invited here to share my personal account, and I will. So as Senator introduced me, my name is Ryan Beardy. I'm from Lake St. Martin First Nation. I'm in my second year of university at the University of Winnipeg, where I'm studying political science and conflict resolution. I'm also employed there as a student mentor. I'm on board of both the Canadian Federation of Students and the University of Winnipeg Student Association. It's not here, but I just recently got the presidency for the Aboriginal Student Council as well, just yesterday. I was also appointed board of directors for the John Howard Society of Manitoba. It's a couple weeks ago. I'm an advocate for equal rights. I'm also a freelance journalist and writer with 3 published articles, 2 more in editing. I've done 2 live broadcasts with CBC and 3 radio interviews so far. This all has merit. I'm a loving father of 2 amazing children. I was introduced, daddy co-parent. We have a garden and a 2-bedroom place for us. It's really close to the university. It's awesome. I'm a role model in my community and for my people, and I absolutely do everything I can for them. Now, what is significant in all this? I'll tell you. 18 months ago to this very day on the 26th, I was released from prison on parole. Before that, prior, I had spent the last 20 years of my life in and out of this justice system. I spent several years behind bars. I actually have it tattooed on my chest with notches. I saved space for their notches. That's the reality that I defeated. I spent most of my youth in these centers, most of my adult life either running from the law or being involved in the justice system. 18 months ago, I was released. And in that short time, I was able to not only get my life together, not only get my family together, but to start giving back to the community and start giving back to society, as indicated by my current capabilities, capacities, and it's testament to the fact that I'm here before you all in Parliament today. Now, essentially, I'm asked, how do I do that? How do you turn your life around? And the answer is restorative justice. So I'm here to tell you guys that today. You see, unbeknownst to me, the steps I took to change my life around were rooted in restorative justice practices. I didn't know it at the time. See, it was all, to me, it was just, I wanted a better life. I didn't want to keep going back to prison. I didn't want to create any more victims. I wanted to change, so I sought out resources. And it's hard in there. I'll tell you, it's hard in this justice system to find these resources to change. This system is not necessarily designed to enable change in restorative justice. It's designed as a punitive measure. It's designed to punish you. It's called criminal justice. So that's essentially wrong. I'll get back to that. I literally begged Headingley Correctional to send me to a therapeutic community, which is also a restorative justice practice. I thrived there and I sought out more resources. I connected with elders ceremony. I had a holistic approach to my rehabilitation. As I defeated my past negative values and belief systems, restorative justice concepts replaced them. Although, again, I didn't know it at the time. I was just on my journey. I found them in my tradition, actually. Like I said, I didn't realize. To me, it was just a journey. Upon sentencing, I was hoping to get out. I got sentenced to penitentiary. Where I sought moral culture, I utilized sharing circles, ceremonies, sweat lodges, one-on-ones. I was taking many in any program I was eligible for. It's really hard actually to get programs in federal corrections. In the past 20 years, I've noticed a decline in programs, and that needs to be addressed. I was allowed to go to minimum security and apply for early parole based on good behavior. I was granted that parole. When I was on the street, I applied for programs and sharing circles to keep me grounded. Almost every step I took was rooted in restorative justice theory, restorative justice practice. I didn't know it. There's more. There's absolutely more, and I'm sure as I process more, and process is so important, the connections will come in mind. Restorative justice practices changed my life. I'm here for you to tell you that today. So I want you all to take into account my personal account when you take consideration for contemplating restorative justice in this country. As well, imagine what society would look like with more empowered, restored individuals giving back like I am and changing like I did. We need restorative justice in Canada. The ingredients are there, you may ask yourself. Well, he found restorative justice in the system. Then why don't we see this replicated in other instances? Because it's extremely difficult to navigate towards these resources, especially in a justice system that's designed to be a punitive measure. I mentioned a downward trend of programming and program availability, and I noticed that firsthand. I've also seen a disproportionate number of Indigenous males fill up these cells, and the ratio of white and Indigenous skew. I've seen that firsthand. When I got released, I looked at the statistics, and it's true. The statistics are across the board. there also exists racism in the system, deeply rooted racism within the justice system, and makes it difficult to navigate as well. You can't imagine how much discrimination plays a factor in somebody's case plan. The very plan that tells them what they're going to do, the program's going to take, what's going to happen to them in the community. I often felt in the past 20 years I had very little control over that until I had to control myself. I feel the Canadian justice system is headed down a scary direction where punitive measures outweighs any rehabilitative measures. It's counterproductive to rehabilitation. It does not stem recidivism. Restorative justice can solve that. Now, being invited here, I didn't want to just come here and add personal account. You invited Ryan, so of course I'm going to allow some space for change. I'm going to allow some personal recommendations, observations. See, there's a lot more to just implementing restorative justice because there are barriers. Barriers exist. There's obstacles. There's injustices in the system, which I'd like to speak to along with my personal account. So I have 10 points I'd like to speak to. First of all, I would like to see the end of solitary confinement in Canada. It is unconstitutional, it is a violation of human rights, it is causing significant psychiatric and psychological harm to those exposed, especially Indigenous. I want to see amendments to Section 31 of the CCRA with specific emphasis on terminating the loose wording that allows it to be used to contribute to disproportionate rates of Indigenous and Blacks in solitary confinement. I think Canada should fully adhere to the United Nations standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Mandela rules. Canada is a founding member of the United Nations. We adhere to international law. We absolutely need to adhere to the Mandela rules. I call for the decarceration of Indigenous prisoners. We need to allow more paroles. We need review boards. We need to re-review security levels. What I saw in there is Indigenous have disproportionately high security levels. I saw that firsthand. We are given disproportionately high security levels. We are exposed to solitary confinement at scarily disproportionate levels. I saw that firsthand. It's actual statistics when you look at it. You have to understand that the justice system is slightly rooted in colonial practice. Penitentiary actually derives from the Latin word 15th century penitentia, which is for penance, penitence. So you can see how just that one example shows that oftentimes the policy is rooted in colonialism. We need to change that. We need to look at that. I call for increased funding for programming across the board with specific emphasis on youth programming. We need to get these youth before they're developing their values and belief systems. I think a lot about my early childhood experience, and I think a lot about the environment I grew up in, and how that shaped me, my values and belief system, which are essentially the core of your being. Like I mentioned, there's a decrease in program. Yet, there's decreases in federal program, yet little change in operating expenditure. So that shows that the funds are being allocated somewhere else. And I don't know if we still believe that more officers equate to decreases in crime and recidivism, but we have a former police officer in Winnipeg that's saying it doesn't, and I agree. I think we need to address the racism that exists in all levels of the system. It exists in policing, it exists in courts, it exists in corrections. There's an us versus them mentality that I grew up with, an us versus them mentality that is perpetuated in the system. Like I mentioned, there's been that's the wrong one. As well, there needs to be more culturally sensitive training and trauma-sensitive training. That's a tough problem. I'll be honest, racism is a tough problem. I gave it some thought, and there's lots to improve. I feel restorative justice, if implemented correctly, can address that. I think we need to address the injustices that exist in society today in cases such as Colton Bushy, Tina Fontaine, Earl Green, to name a few. You can't have a community if community is divided. Society is divided on these issues. We need to address them. Addressing injustices such as these will restore faith in the system and restore the community relations to the justice system, which is absolutely needed. We need to end mandatory minimums. They are counterproductive to justice. Not only do they take the decisions away from the judge, but from what I saw, they create a bargaining culture within the inmates. They create a bargaining culture with the Crown Attorney, the lawyers. They have little to do with the judge. They have little to do with justice. They're taking discretionary powers away from the judges and forcing judges to oftentimes instill unfair and unjust sentences and absolutely disregarding glad-do factors. I think it's important to review the implementation of GLAD-2 reports and GLAD-2 factors. They're being handled by non-trained and oftentimes racist individuals within the justice system. I saw it myself. They're being used against us in some instances. You know, you can lay your heart and soul on a GLAD-2 report, and if the person that's doing the GLAD-2 report doesn't even care, then what's going to be done? You just laid your heart and soul to it. For what? A lot of times it's being used against you as well, as a barrier. You have these problems, so you're not getting parole. Like I said, it's hard to access these programs to get that parole even. I also question why restorative justice agencies such as Inishwaywen was asked to stop filing GLAD-2 reports for Indigenous clients. We need GLAD-2 reports to play a factor in Canada. Finally, I ask for the increased and mandatory cultural sensitivity training and trauma awareness training for anyone involved in the criminal justice system, with specific emphasis on frontline justice workers and correction officers. It's time we educate our citizenry and stop hiding behind ignorance and uneducation as an excuse to perpetuate racist policy. Now, these are my recommendations, and I appreciate you for listening. In summary, I ask that you take my personal account into consideration when contemplating restorative justice as well. I wasn't absolutely sure how I can contribute. I'd like to ask members of public and media, feel free to ask me any questions. If I missed anything, you'd like to hear from me. I also want to speak to political reality and political viability, and I know that these are terms I learned in political science, and some things are tough sells, absolutely. But what we need to do here is we need to increase our frame of reference, our viewpoint on the justice system. You see, we can see that there's benefits to restorative justice. And the frame of reference is basically your viewpoint of how you see things. On the peripherals of restorative justice, we need to expand our mind and expand our viewpoints and keep an open mind. I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here to this important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Allow me to say that prior to the opening of this open caucus, Ryan told me, well, I don't have a lot to say, you know, and I'm impressed by senators and so on. Ryan, we are good people, you know. I'm so impressed by your outstanding contribution, and it is so wonderful that your voice is heard in the public space. Colleagues, watch him. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Joanne Vallée, c'est un plaisir de vous la présenter pour moi. Madame Vallée a écouté avec beaucoup d'attention et d'intérêt les propos de Monsieur Birdie et elle a consacré sa carrière de service public à la justice, notamment à la promotion de la justice réparatrice, et elle continue de le faire dans un organisme sans but lucratif qui réunit des victimes et des auteurs d'actes criminels avec des membres de la communauté. Madame Vallée, je l'ai dit, a été une haute fonctionnaire au Québec. Elle a travaillé plusieurs années au Service correctionnel du Québec. Et quand j'étais l'ombudsman parlementaire du Québec, j'avais quelques sous-ministres, directeurs généraux sur ma liste des... Il y avait la blacklist, puis il y avait la liste de ceux à qui on peut parler, avec qui on peut faire avancer des choses. Et Madame Vallée était en haut de la liste de ceux qui font avancer les choses. Alors, donc, elle a été aussi sous-commissaire pour le Québec à Service correctionnel du Canada et elle est maintenant au Centre de services de justice réparatrice, un organisme sans but lucratif qui réunit donc, comme je l'ai dit, les victimes et les auteurs d'actes criminels. Alors, sans plus tarder, Madame Vallée, merci d'être là et à vous la parole.
Merci, Madame la sénatrice. Bonjour. Good morning to all. C'est un grand privilège de pouvoir m'adresser à vous aujourd'hui afin de nourrir vos discussions puis vos réflexions sur la justice réparatrice. Et je vous remercie très sincèrement de l'invitation. Et se joint à moi le Centre de services de justice réparatrice, dont je suis une des ambassadrices. Puis il y a une autre ambassadrice dans la salle avec moi aujourd'hui, Lorraine Burzon, qui est aussi ambassadrice. Vous l'aurez noté en prenant connaissance de mon curriculum vitae, je ne suis pas une experte de la justice réparatrice. Mon intérêt émane surtout d'une question qui m'a été posée il y a plus de 20 ans par un avocat du ministère de la Justice du Canada, M. Matt Farrell. Alors, il y a plus de 20 ans, David Farrell est venu à Montréal me rencontrer dans le cadre d'une activité, puis il m'a posé une question qui m'avait prise un peu par surprise. Il m'a dit, « Joanne, crois-tu en une justice satisfaisante, une justice réparatrice? » Comme lui, je note à l'époque la désillusion des victimes face au système de justice. Celle-ci étant nourrie par la crainte de ne pas être crue, par la perception que la justice n'est que procédure et qu'expéditive, et par l'absence fréquente de remords témoignés par l'agresseur lors du procès. Et malheureusement, trop souvent, la victime mesure l'attention que porte le tribunal et la société à sa souffrance par la longueur de la sentence rendue. J'observe également que chez le délinquant, l'absence de confiance face au système de justice, et vous comprendrez qu'il est souvent très encouragé à ne pas trop parler durant son procès. Alors, pour lui aussi, la justice est souvent que procédure. Il sent parfois qu'il est réduit à n'être qu'un risque à gérer et il s'interroge sérieusement sur la place réelle que la communauté entend lui faire une fois qu'il aura retrouvé sa liberté. Malheureusement, 20 ans plus tard, la réalité n'a pas beaucoup changé, en apparence du moins. Et la justice est mise à rude épreuve, surtout depuis l'arrêt Jordan. Il existe au sein de la population, je pense, la population canadienne, une véritable crise de confiance face à un système de justice surchargé, au retard et aux coûts importants. Pourtant, on compte bel et bien des projets et des initiatives concrètes qui apportent aux victimes, aux agresseurs et à la communauté une expérience positive, une forme de justice qu'on qualifie de satisfaisante. Je vais donc vous partager différentes expériences de justice réparatrice, vous brosser un portrait des contraintes et des pistes à explorer afin de poursuivre les avancées. Et l'objectif, du moins pour nous, au Centre de services de justice réparatrice, c'est d'enraciner, entre autres, une plus grande confiance de la communauté envers le système de justice. Premièrement, il faut reconnaître que la justice réparatrice n'est pas une panacée, ne s'applique pas à toutes les situations. Elle vise avant tout à établir un dialogue constructif entre les parties pour amener une plus grande satisfaction. Le respect de chacun doit être préservé. Les parties doivent y participer sur une base entièrement volontaire et sans obligation. La victime doit pouvoir exprimer sa souffrance et avoir la conviction que les impacts du crime qu'elle a subi ont été reconnus. En l'accompagnant dans cette démarche, on lui permet de se décharger de sentiments destructeurs et de reprendre du pouvoir sur sa vie. C'est un peu ce qui manque dans le système de justice traditionnel. Ce sentiment que la victime n'est qu'accessoire à la preuve afin de démontrer la faute et que sa contribution s'y limite. Pour le délinquant, c'est le moment de réfléchir aux conséquences de son geste, non seulement sur la société, mais aussi sur la victime et leurs proches. Et quand je dis leurs proches, j'inclus les proches de l'agresseur, mais aussi les proches de la victime. Et c'est l'occasion de se responsabiliser face à son comportement et de le faire dans le respect de l'autre. Et cette responsabilisation ne fait pas que s'incarner dans une sentence. Elle se manifeste par la reconnaissance des torts causés et sa capacité à en témoigner, à s'engager dans une démarche concrète. Deuxièmement, la justice réparatrice peut prendre plusieurs formes et peut s'appliquer aux diverses étapes du processus pénal et correctionnel. Par exemple, ici même à Ottawa, il existe le projet de justice collaboratrice au Palais de justice d'Ottawa qui permet à des victimes puis à des délinquants d'entamer un dialogue de manière différente selon les besoins. Il peut s'agir d'une médiation menant à une entente. C'est un processus qui s'effectue en amont du procès. Et les deux parties y participent, encore une fois, sur une base volontaire. Elles sont accompagnées individuellement et si rencontre il y a, 2 accompagnateurs y seront. Les proches touchés par l'événement peuvent aussi être présents. Advenant à la conclusion d'une entente, celle-ci sera déposée au juge pour information et le juge pourra même inclure dans son jugement les conditions à respecter découlant de l'entente de médiation. Au Service correctionnel du Canada, on offre la possibilité aux délinquants et aux victimes d'entreprendre une démarche de médiation. Celle-ci respecte les mêmes conditions qu'expliquées précédemment. Il n'y a pas de gain à anticiper par le délinquant au niveau de sa peine ou une libération conditionnelle. La médiation peut s'étendre sur une longue période, elle peut prendre de différentes formes, correspondance, vidéo ou rencontre. Cette démarche permet aux victimes d'obtenir des réponses à des questions et aussi de mettre un terme, si je peux m'exprimer ainsi, à un moment grave de sa vie. Maintenant, je vais vous parler du Centre de services de justice réparatrice où des victimes s'adressent à nous à divers moments de leur vie. Parfois, elles communiquent avec nous longtemps après que le crime ait été subi. Victimes d'agressions sexuelles ou d'inceste, par exemple, elles souhaitent se libérer de leur souffrance lorsque même les événements ont lieu 30 ans auparavant. Dans plusieurs cas, les victimes, à l'époque des faits, n'avaient pas porté plainte, craignant de ne pas être crues par la police, car elles n'avaient même pas été par leur entourage. Elles se présentent donc au Centre de justice réparatrice, le cœur, je vous dirais, assez lourd de cette entrave à une vie normale. Donc, de manière générale, le Centre organise des rencontres entre victimes et agresseurs ayant subi et commis des crimes de même nature. Les agresseurs ne sont donc pas ceux impliqués directement avec la victime. Les intervenants du Service correctionnel du Canada et des maisons de transition collaborent afin de s'assurer de la bonne foi des délinquants, de la préparation et du suivi. Les mêmes conditions décrites précédemment sont présentes. 2 accompagnateurs, un homme et une femme, participent à la rencontre ultime. La présence des 2 genres, je dois avouer, s'avère assurante pour les parties. De plus, 1 à 2 membres de la communauté assistent à la rencontre. Ces derniers témoins de la communauté viennent rappeler la dimension sociale du crime et encourager l'engagement citoyen à contribuer à la réparation en reconnaissant la souffrance de la victime et en appuyant la démarche de justice réparatrice des 2 parties. Également, le Centre de services de justice réparatrice a créé une activité particulière en lien avec des communautés autochtones. Lors d'une fin de semaine d'atelier appelé « La puissance de nos voix », des femmes autochtones, victimes des comportements des hommes de leur communauté, ont appris à exprimer ce qu'elles ont vécu pour se libérer de cette souffrance enfouie au fond d'elles. Pour rompre le cycle de la violence, elles décident de sortir du tabou en s'adressant à leurs agresseurs ou à leur communauté par le biais d'une vidéo. Celle-ci est l'objet d'échanges en famille et en communauté permettant le début d'un processus de réparation. Je dois avouer que c'est assez récent, puis la vidéo va probablement être utilisée avec les agresseurs qui sont incarcérés au Service correctionnel du Canada pour entamer un dialogue avec eux. L'expérience génère beaucoup d'intérêt au sein de la communauté autochtone concernée par ces crimes, car elle y perçoit, dans cette forme de justice, un outil potentiel destiné à restaurer des liens brisés et fragilisés entre ses membres pour ainsi améliorer son tissu social. D'ailleurs, le Centre a d'autres initiatives de justice réparatrice touchant d'autres types de communautés. Par exemple, une communauté musulmane a pu rencontrer et discuter avec un homme ayant commis des crimes haineux. Comme vous pouvez le constater, la justice réparatrice se manifeste sous différentes formes, à différents moments de la vie des victimes et des offenseurs. Elle entre en scène avant le procès ou après, et même lorsqu'une plainte n'a pas été déposée. La justice réparatrice n'a pas la prétention de remplacer la justice traditionnelle. Elle ne peut s'appliquer dans toutes les circonstances. Elle doit absolument demeurer volontaire. Les avantages de la justice réparatrice sont simplement de sortir les parties d'un processus antagonisant qui met davantage l'emphase sur une mécanique qui vise à mettre en preuve des faits pour condamner un agresseur. Cette mécanique, bien que nécessaire, il faut l'admettre, ne répond pas à toutes les attentes des parties en cause. Et lorsqu'on demande aux personnes, aux victimes ou agresseurs ce qu'elles retiennent de l'expérience de la justice réparatrice, la réponse est simple. Elles ont simplement obtenu des réponses à des questions, elles ont pu échanger, traverser leurs peurs et leurs honte, dialoguer et elles ont été véritablement entendues. Elles éprouvent un sentiment de satisfaction, surtout quand elles voient que leur parole a un impact dans la prise de conscience des agresseurs et cela ouvre la porte à une possible guérison ou du moins les aide à tourner la page. Et pour les agresseurs, c'est aussi une façon d'aller, comme je vous disais, plus loin que ce qu'on attend souvent de lui dans le système correctionnel, c'est-à-dire d'avoir un bon comportement. Il peut s'amender, puis il voit vraiment concrètement l'ouverture que la communauté peut avoir pour le réintégrer une fois qu'il va avoir retrouvé sa liberté. En conclusion, une plus grande place de la justice réparatrice est très certainement bienvenue. Et pour y arriver, il existe un ensemble de conditions. Je vous dirais en premier, avoir un programme d'éducation du public et des groupes communautaires, car il y a plusieurs fausses perceptions et différentes compréhensions de l'approche de justice réparatrice. Deuxièmement, mettre en place un programme de formation à l'intention de tous les acteurs du système de justice pénale, des policiers en passant par la couronne, les avocats de la défense, les services correctionnels et les organismes communautaires pour les victimes et les délinquants. Troisièmement, développer une politique robuste faisant l'objet d'un fort appui des politiciens et des gouvernements. Quatrièmement, le gouvernement fédéral doit assumer un fort leadership et engager le dialogue avec les provinces en raison des différents paliers d'impliqués. Et évidemment, plusieurs ministères doivent être engagés parce que, comme on l'a dit, les services de santé, les services sociaux, c'est important qu'ils soient aussi engagés. Cinquièmement, assurer un financement adéquat des programmes et des services. Et sixièmement, effectuer des évaluations rigoureuses des programmes. Ce sont des conditions qui sont, à mon humble avis, essentielles à la mise en application d'un vaste programme de justice réparatrice et conséquemment à la restauration d'une plus grande confiance des citoyens en notre système de justice. Je vous dirais que je crois que la justice réparatrice a l'avantage d'introduire un peu un brin d'humanité dans notre système de justice criminelle. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Your contribution is much appreciated, and we're getting some good perspectives here. We've got one more panelist to go, but just before I introduce her, we've got the list here for senators. You want to get down on the list for questions or comments? And I'll give that over to you, colleague. And also, the same with the audience. Again, there's Sarah over here who can take your name down. We need to get as much as possible, as soon as possible, because we have to allocate the time that we have remaining in the program. So, final panelist is Joanne Wimmers. She's a professor in the School of Criminology at the Université de Montréal and an international expert in victimology. Dr. Wimmers is also the head of the research group Victimology and Restorative Justice at the International Center for Comparative Criminology. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. It's a privilege and an honor to be here and to share my work with victims of crime with all of you today. My presentation is based on my work, which is described in my last book, Victimology, A Canadian Perspective, and I have with me copies of the Chapter 11 on reparative justice, available in English and French for everyone who's here for distribution. So I'll look at your questions. I'm going to turn them around, starting with the second question: can restorative justice programs provide better justice for victims, offenders, and society as a whole? Now, to begin with, I talk about reparative justice in the book, and I think that's one of the things that we do in victimology that differs from some of the things we've heard so far today. Restorative justice is a criminological concept. It grew from a focus on the offender and a desire to develop more efficient and effective responses to crime. While it may include the victim and recognizes the harm suffered by the victim, we've heard that this morning, it takes a broad approach to harm, which is consistent with the domain of criminology. Consequently, some authors have criticized restorative justice for being offender-oriented and using victims, much like the conventional criminal justice system does, to promote the rehabilitation of offenders. Restorative justice can offer benefits to victims, but it's not necessarily victim-centered. And I think that's an important distinction. And why in victimology we use the term reparative justice, which is victim-centered reparation. En français, la justice réparatrice centrée sur la victime, a victimological concept. Based on human rights, a human rights approach, and it focuses on the needs and rights of victims, including their need for reparation. So that's an important distinction, is the focus shifts. That's not to say that the rights of the accused are ignored. It's a human rights approach. So the dignity of each individual is at the core. Victims often express a need for reparation. And reparation can take many different forms. We've heard that this morning already. including restitution, return of goods, of rights to victims, compensation, which largely includes financial compensation, as well as symbolic measures such as an apology, recognition, public denunciation, other forms of satisfaction. Also, rehabilitation is something we don't often talk about, but social, psychological, medical, legal services aimed at healing the victim. These are also forms of reparation that victims often express the need for. Preventative measures ensure that it doesn't happen again. Protection of the victim. These are important needs that are expressed by victims and are addressed in the reparative justice approach. This is important to note that it extends beyond the narrow legal definition of reparation that we find in our Victims' Bill of Rights, namely restitution. And I think that's an important distinction. It's unfortunate that the Bill of Rights is limited to restitution, since it is to address victims' needs, which are much, much broader than simple restitution. And it offers a flexibility because reparation can take so many different forms, and that's important. That's one of the things we've heard echoed in many of the presentations this morning, the importance of flexibility, souplesse, to meet the needs of the victims and the context, the situation. It's not limited to financial reparation, which allows the participation of offenders who are unable to pay money for to their victim, and it focuses at the same time on victims' needs. This is important because not all offenders will have the means to be able to make reparation, financial reparation to victims. And not all victims want or need particularly financial reparation, or restitution as it's called here in Canada. It's also not limited to reparation by the offender, and I think this is an important distinction too that we often forget. Sometimes the offender is unavailable. He's not known, he's deceased, or he's unwilling to engage in a reparation, also a reality. And the victim can still obtain reparation from other sources. For example, government-run compensation schemes offering financial support and access to aid, victim assistance programs that address rehabilitation and other needs of victims. So the focus is on victims' needs, their perceptions, their dignity. This is a human rights approach, as I said. It's not about disrespecting the rights of the accused. It's about respecting the human rights of victims. So this reparative justice has three components. The first being reparation, which I described the different forms of reparation: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and I call it prevention. Others call it guarantees of non-repetition. The second component is procedural rights for victims: the right to information, the right to participation, the right to support, to legal assistance. Treating victims with dignity and respect means recognizing victims as persons before the law with rights and recourse, something that victims in Canada do not currently have, despite the 2015 Victims' Bill of Rights. Procedural rights go beyond the criminal justice process. It includes all forms of reparation, such as rehabilitation, as I pointed out, victim services, including compensation, which do not currently exist across Canada. And proactively informing victims about the available programs and services, a proactive approach, so that victims know what's out there for them, they can make choices, and they can access the services that respond to their needs. The third component is victims' experiences in the justice process, and these include perceptions of trust, of fairness, empowerment, and healing, words that we've heard again this morning. Justice is a multi-dimensional concept for victims. It includes procedural justice, how outcomes are reached, very important, as well as distributive justice, what the actual outcome is. Sentencing often is the focus, but it's not limited to that. Procedural justice is an important part of why victims who participate in restorative justice programs are often satisfied. It's that fact that they were able to participate in a way that they are not allowed in, for example, the conventional criminal justice system. Voice and standing are important determinants of procedural justice for victims, and voice and standing provide victims with recognition in procedures and allow them to regain a sense of control following their victimization. This notion of empowerment, we've heard it this morning, very important in the healing process for victims, and something that is often found through restorative justice programs, and more correctly, reparative justice. Victims expect criminal justice authorities as well as mediators to be neutral. This, again, is very important to remember. A victim-centered approach is not synonymous with a one-sided approach. Reparative justice must never lose sight of the rights of the accused. Trust is a determinant of procedural justice as well as a product of it. And we've heard many times already the confidence in the criminal justice system, and it's lacking in recent years. Procedural justice reinforces victims' trust in our justice system. Unfortunately, the conventional criminal justice system often fails to provide procedural justice to victims, thus undermining their confidence in our justice system. By providing victims with an opportunity to voice their views and their concerns, programs like victim-offender dialogue or mediation enhance their trust in the justice system. And trust in the criminal justice system is important because it can influence whether or not victims will report crimes to the police in the first place. So important when we're addressing this confidence or lack of confidence in our justice system. So that then is the second question. Now back to your first question. How then? How do we do this? And then it's the victim-centered reparative justice. As I said, flexibility is very important. So there's not one model to be presented and adhered to. Reparative justice can be an alternative to the conventional criminal justice system. It can be something complementary to it. For example, the program in Quebec with le Centre de Service Justice Réparatrice. It can be integrated in the conventional criminal justice system. Reparative justice is not limited to the conventional criminal justice system. Certain forms of reparation, such as rehabilitation of victims, can occur independent of the criminal justice system. That's also important because it won't always be possible, the conventional criminal response, or desirable. This gives it flexibility and allows it to focus on the needs of the individual victim within the given context, whatever that may be. Sometimes victims will want to avoid a trial or criminalization of the accused, and in these cases, alternative forms of justice may be suitable. And we've heard about that this morning. But victims should not have to go outside of the criminal justice system to participate and to be recognized as persons before the law. It should also be possible for them to be recognized as persons before the law within the conventional criminal justice process. Unfortunately, that is not yet the case. And so often victims will go to restorative justice programs afterwards in order to meet needs that were never satisfied in the criminal justice process. Sometimes serious cases, or if the offender doesn't want to participate in restorative justice, the criminal justice system, the conventional criminal justice system, will be necessary. In a victim-centered reparative approach, it is important that victims find the same recognition and respect for their dignity in the criminal justice system as they do in alternative forms of justice. This is currently not the case in Canada. Our criminal justice system considers victims to be witnesses of a crime against the state. They are not considered to be persons before the law. And integrating restorative justice values, or principles as some authors call them, such as the participation, respect for the dignity of the individual in the criminal justice system. This is one way that we can integrate a reparative approach in criminal justice, recognizing victims as more than witnesses in the criminal justice process, but as participants. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it. 5 great presentations to get us off and running. And now we've set the stage for questions and comments. I've got 4 people from the audience. We'll try to work them in as we go along. And we'll start at the table with our colleagues and Senator Munson.
Oh, I didn't think I was going to be first. Well, this is the biggest crowd we've had since we began these open caucuses 4 years ago. And with that in mind, I'd like to, he won't do it because he's so humble, Senator Art Eggleton. This is his last open caucus. He retires today and tomorrow. He has his speech in the Senate tomorrow. And what he has done with his open caucus has brought all of us together from all parties in the Senate to work together on issues like this. And I just want to acknowledge you, Senator, for the fine work you've done in the last 4 years, and we hope we can keep this open caucus concept open, and we can have public participation. I'm the former chair of the Human Rights Committee, and we had started at that time a study on the human rights of prisoners. And it's now the job of my dear friend, Senator Wanda Bernard, who is the chair of the committee, to continue this. So on restorative justice, in terms of the last couple of years and where we're going, I think you're going to see something in our report which will deal with what we've been talking about this morning, which I think is extremely important. So I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a senator who asks a lot of questions. I spent my whole life doing that. And so the question, or the observation and question I have this morning with the panel, it's sort of a twofold, very briefly. What does it take to push restorative justice over the line to another level that it actually is in place? Madame Wilmers, you talked about a collaborative justice program in Ottawa, and it's voluntary, and I'd like to try to understand where the line is, the mechanism that you mentioned briefly, the mechanism of at what point, we walk through the prison system, it's very complex. At what point does restorative justice, where's restorative justice is the answer as opposed to the other punitive measures that have been taking place or the overwhelming punitive measures that take place? So where does that determination take place, and at what point within the system does that happen? That's basically it.
We'll start with Professor Wilmers, and then if any of the other panelists jump in on it, happy to do that.
Okay. I thought you meant, I know you said Joanne Wilmers, but I thought you meant Joanne Vallée, because she mentioned Ottawa and not. But I'm glad to. Again, from the approach that I'm advocating, I think it depends. We start with the victim's needs. And in terms of, the idea would be addressing the victim's needs. Is there a need for support? Is there a need for what forms of reparation is the victim looking for? And what is possible in the context? Is there an accused? What is the crime of which the person is accused? Is the person willing and able to make some form of reparation? If so, what? And I think it would take it from there. So I think the answer would be early on you would be looking at the different options based on a needs-based approach.
Professor Llewellyn.
So, I think that I think it's absolutely the case that when you're talking about processes that bring an opportunity for victim and offender to come together, that's one way in which we can include restorative processes across as opportunities across the criminal justice system, and those need to be attended to in voluntary ways and directed to ensure that they're safe and meaningful for those who've been harmed. I do think we need to be quite careful about fixating on the ways in which the current criminal justice system identifies who's a victim and who's an offender in overly simplistic ways that don't take account of systemic inequalities and marginalization. But I don't think that's the limit of where thinking restoratively, thinking in relational and different ways about justice can take us in reforming the criminal justice system. So to your point about work in human rights, in terms of the ways in which we change how we approach court processes, how we approach correctional processes, in Nova Scotia, how we approach investigations in the context of human rights, and how we utilize opportunities to increasingly bring people together to have their voices heard, and not necessarily in mediation, in interpersonal relationship mediation. That needs to be voluntary. How the system actually works in terms of how it incorporates restorative values and principles does not need to be so limited in its imagination to be about victim-offender mediation or those sorts of interpersonal processes. So imagine, if you will, a court process working differently in terms of whose voices are heard in the proceedings. And how it is that correctional facilities operate. There's a number of initiatives already underway that demonstrate for us the power of a restorative approach, thinking more relationally inside the criminal justice system, that aren't only oriented towards addressing the interpersonal harms between individual victims and individual offenders, but take a different approach to the way we deal with all of those affected by crime. And so I would say we need to have a much broader imagination for how that rolls.
Okay, Joanne Vallée, and then we'll hear from Ryan Beardy as well.
Pour aller une étape plus loin, je pense que très honnêtement, comme ancien haut fonctionnaire, si je regarde exactement ce qui se passe au service correctionnel du Canada ou ailleurs au gouvernement, je crois que bien qu'on parle de justice réparatrice au niveau du gouvernement fédéral notamment, puis même au niveau du gouvernement du Québec, je crois que ça prend une politique claire, une orientation claire, avec, si nécessaire, des amendements, notamment la loi sur le système correctionnel, Parce que même si la notion de réparation est incluse dans le code criminel au niveau des principes, il reste que les orientations du gouvernement, depuis quelques années, sont plus ou moins claires. Et très honnêtement, je pense que plusieurs, que ce soit les fonctionnaires ou que ce soit les groupes communautaires, attendent une orientation claire au niveau du gouvernement fédéral. Et quand je disais dans une de mes recommandations, un leadership fort, parce qu'il faut rallier. Quand on parle de justice réparatrice, on parle de toutes les étapes du processus de justice criminelle. On parle aussi de la Cour municipale, parce qu'à la Cour municipale, on voit, je vous dirais, les êtres humains dans vraiment des gens qui sont complètement, je vous dirais, sans moyens. Il y a des opportunités immenses au niveau de la Cour municipale pour gérer des événements criminels, entre guillemets. Donc, ça prend vraiment un leadership. Il faut ramener les ministères de la Justice à s'asseoir ensemble, les ministères de la Sécurité publique, et si nécessaire, faire des amendements aux lois et évidemment des ressources, parce que, comme le professeur Lédoine le disait, il y a beaucoup de projets pilotes, mais c'est comme si on éparpillait les initiatives avec un petit peu d'argent, sans trop avoir d'évaluation. Je pense que ça prend vraiment un leadership puis un programme clair avec une orientation claire pour après aussi que les acteurs du système de justice, que ce soit les juges, que ce soit les procureurs de la couronne, se sentent soutenus s'ils décident d'aller vers une justice réparatrice. C'est tout.
Merci.
Brian?
I think if I understand your question, you're asking where restorative justice fits into the system?
Where is
At
that
one
fine
point-
line? I mean, it's worked for you, but you seem to find your own way as well. You found your own way without even knowing probably that restorative justice was there. But and it was just mentioned about the municipal part of it all at the very beginning. At what point does somebody say, this is a case where restorative justice will work, as opposed to...
In almost all cases, I would say. In almost all cases, I think. Yeah. And at one point, would it work? I think, well, from my experience, at what point can restorative justice interject into somebody's life would be pre-charge, post-charge, judicial process, upon release, as well incarcerated. I just want to draw attention to a program that was taken out of federal corrections called Lifeline. When I was in Stony Mountain Penitentiary, there were talks of the lifers and the older population saying Lifeline was very good. What it was is they brought victims of crime into the institution, and that was very beneficial. I actually, at that time, I wish that I had more, I hate victim offender, harm creator and harm receiver relations. I think we need that. No, to answer your question, I think in almost all cases.
Interesting. You want, okay.
Okay, so in our current restorative justice, we have both, like Ryan said, pre-diversion and post-diversion. So pre-diversions come from the Manitoba First Nation Police, or the RCMP. But in order to participate in our restorative justice program, the offender has to take 100% responsibility for their actions in order to come into our program. And then, so depending on who the referring source is, so if it's the RCMP or Manitoba First Nation Police, they would give us the file directly, and we'll work with the individual, and then once we're done working with them, we'll do a follow-up report to the referring officer, as well as with the Crown attorneys. Once it gets to the court, we have our community justice workers directly in the court, sitting in the court, that advocate, saying this could be a case for our program. So, and then if the Crown agrees, then it is diverted to our program. And then once we go through the diversion process and the restorative justice process, then we do also a follow-up report to the Crown attorney to let them know that they followed all other conditions. But the main part is that the person participating has to take 100% responsibility for what they did. So that is where we've been able to get those diversions through the pre and post.
Merci. Sénateur Joyal.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Merci, Madame Vallée, pour votre présentation. When I was listening to you, I was asking in my mind, what is the essential, I should say, presence of restorative justice in the overall concept of rehabilitation? Because as you know, when we incarcerate a person, it is essentially for a matter of retribution and rehabilitation. And how much the concept of restorative justice is integrated in the rehabilitation, and how much the judges are trained to understand that when there is a plan of rehabilitation that is presented to the judge or to the prison authorities and those who have to care about the offender, have integrated restorative justice in the rehabilitation process. It seems to me that it is diverging ways. It's not really part of the same approach, unless I have wrongly understood your presentation. Could you expand on that so that we see what kind of initiative we should take as senators to make sure that in the redefinition or the understanding of the rehabilitation, we pay attention, I should say we give essential attention to restorative justice?
It's a complicated question. Je ne parlerai pas du côté du volet de la justice et ce que ça prend pour les juges, parce que c'est pas vraiment là mon expérience avec les juges, quoique je pense pas qu'il y ait beaucoup de formations qui est offerte aux juges au niveau de la justice réparatrice. Mais je vais laisser d'autres répondre. Là, je pense que parmi vous, il y a d'anciens juristes qui vont pouvoir mieux répondre à la question que moi. Au niveau du service correctionnel, très honnêtement, je pense que la notion de justice réparatrice n'est pas du tout, je ne dirais pas du tout présente, mais elle est très peu présente. Elle est présente dans la mesure où elle est liée à un programme qui est accessible, qui est là, mais qui est actuellement, je pense que depuis les années 2010-2012, il y a eu des coupures importantes au niveau du financement des services correctionnels. Je vais parler du service correctionnel du Canada, qui limite un petit peu les possibilités pour le service correctionnel d'injecter de l'argent additionnel pour la justice réparatrice. Mais je pense que la notion de justice réparatrice n'est pas suffisamment présente à l'intérieur des établissements carcéraux. Pas parce qu'il n'y avait pas de volonté, pas parce qu'il n'y avait pas d'intérêt, bien au contraire. Mais je pense qu'il y a eu des coupures importantes dans les dernières années. Lifeline, c'est une coupure qui a été faite il y a longtemps. Et comme je vous le disais, il y a une espèce de flou actuellement. Qui a vraiment le leadership? Et là, je vous parle comme citoyenne. Je ne vous parle plus comme ancienne, tout comme ça. Je vous parle comme citoyenne. Quand moi-même, j'ai eu à faire des recherches pour la présentation d'aujourd'hui ou pour un autre article que j'ai écrit au nom du Centre de services de justice réparatrice, à un moment donné, écoutez, là, je suis ancien sous-ministre adjoint, puis là, je cherchais sur Internet qui a le leadership de la justice réparatrice. Et ça m'attristait de voir que oui, probablement que c'est le ministère de la Justice, mais c'était pas clair. C'était pas clair. Et c'est quoi les orientations précises? Là non plus, c'est pas clair. Et comme je vous dis, je suis criminologue de formation, j'ai travaillé au gouvernement fédéral, j'ai travaillé pendant quand même 30 ans à côtoyer le gouvernement fédéral, puis il y a eu des époques où il y avait vraiment un leadership précis, on savait qui était en charge, on connaissait les orientations, et ça, c'est important parce que ça donne une légitimité, après ça, aux autorités correctionnelles ou peu importe. Quand il y a une orientation claire, vous le savez, ça donne une légitimité aux gens de dire oui, on va dans cette orientation-là, oui, on investit. Et ça, actuellement, je crois que ça manque. Je ne dis pas que ça ne viendra pas, ça, je ne sais pas, je ne suis pas dans le secret des dieux, mais je crois que ça manque. Mais c'est sûr qu'il y a un intérêt, je ne vous le cacherai pas. J'ai eu des employés, j'ai vu des gens travailler, faire du travail dans l'ombre pour aller vers la justice réparatrice, pour permettre... Vous savez, il y a des victimes qui appellent au service correctionnel. On avait le bureau des services d'aide aux victimes complètement démunies, apeurées, parce qu'elles n'ont pas toutes les réponses, parce qu'ils ont besoin d'aide, ils ont besoin d'accompagnement. Puis il y a du travail qui se fait par les intervenants qui va bien au-delà de ce qu'on peut imaginer. Et je pense que si on avait vraiment une volonté claire de pouvoir les engager, de pouvoir les accompagner, de pouvoir répondre à leurs questions, puis de pouvoir aussi, comme je vous disais, responsabiliser les délinquants, puis aller au-delà du concept d'avoir un bon comportement, on gagnerait. Parce que ceux qui ont été capables de le faire, je pense qu'ils s'en sont sortis, comment je vous dirais, mieux équipés pour faire face à la réalité du retour à la société, puis pour aussi reprendre vraiment une place dans la société, pas juste de faire une réinsertion sociale, mais vraiment de sentir qu'ils sont insérés socialement, puis qu'ils ont une contribution comme citoyens.
Le sujet est intéressant, passionnant. Collègues, on a beaucoup d'intervenants, y compris des intervenants dans la salle. Donc, je vais vous inviter à des questions courtes et à des interventions les plus synthèses possibles. Et Madame Llewellyn, vous voulez ajouter?
So I will be as brief as possible. I think just to add to that, in terms of what might be very helpful for the judiciary, in terms of the capacity they have to be encouraging and supporting the inclusion of restorative justice as options within sentencing or to inform their sentencing. Nova Scotia has just embarked on, we've had a long tradition of having restorative justice for youth since 1999 and then 2001 across the province at all entry points. That entry point was increasingly used by judges in youth court because of the capacity that they had within the Youth Criminal Justice Act to hold conferences. There's much more flexibility in terms of how they might use it. The province has just rolled out the similar access for adults across the entire province. And we're in the process of integrating those protocols so that it can be available in a similar way. And one of the issues that we've identified and hit, particularly in working with the judiciary, is that it's less clear the place of restorative justice in the criminal code, and that's particularly important for statutory courts. There's some confusion that it only serves as an alternative justice mechanism, as a diversion tool, and not as much capacity to build that into there's many who argue that discretion is there under the sentencing responsibility to acquire information, to inform sentencing, but it's not as flexible. There's not provisions to hold conferencing, to incorporate a restorative approach in terms of both the way in which their work is conducted or what opportunities judges have to be referring those matters for restorative justice programs. And so I think there's real scope for more clarity and more of a role for restorative justice that would support then the work that you're discussing at the rehabilitation side.
Merci.
Okay, Senator Christmas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing this topic to us. It's obviously very timely and very needed. And I'd like to acknowledge all the presentations, especially Mr. Beardy and bringing his personal story to the table. Thank you. The stat that I was quite surprised with was that over 50% of Canadians have not heard about restorative justice or reparative justice. And given that we've had at least 40 years of experience of working with this, and there's obviously the results have transformed many Canadians. I guess my question to the panel is do post-secondary institutions offer courses and programs about restorative or reparative justice? And the reason I ask that question is I'm wondering, the gatekeepers of this process, be it police officers or be it crowns or be it judges or parole or probation officers, they're the gatekeepers from this process. And if they don't know and believe in it, obviously participation will be affected. So I'm wondering if these gatekeepers have the professional training either at law schools or through their own professional associations as professional development courses. How much of this is being taught to those who are the gatekeepers?
Who wants to start on that? Okay.
I would say I would say not many. Actually, I don't know. I know in the University of Winnipeg there's restorative justice classes. In fact, I met Karen Ridd, her name is. She actually, we had a discussion before I even came here. And I know John Howard Society, that John Hutton used to be a restorative justice professor. And Neil Funk-Unraw from Minnesota Simons College is an ex-professor of restorative justice as well. So in Winnipeg, we have professors and ex-professors that are restorative justice based. And that's an excellent idea, actually, that could stem to an idea to get the police, the Crown, anybody involved in justice to educate themselves on restorative justice, and perhaps we could get some sort of involvement from them, from the professors.
Okay, who else? Joanne Wimmers.
Yes. Thanks. I think from a victim's perspective, one of the groups that we often forget are the victim support workers. I think it's very important for them to be made aware of what's available. And from a victimology perspective in particular, again, because there's often this prejudice thinking it's offender-oriented and it's using the victim for the offender's well-being and not forgetting. The most successful projects I've seen with restorative justice have been where very serious crimes, so for example sexual assault, have been framed within the therapeutic context, so for victims. And there it has been as part of the healing process for the victim. And again, that's a group that often is not part of this dialogue because it's typically from the rehabilitation, probation, corrections perspective that we approach it. So I think we have to turn it around.
And Professor Llewellyn.
So what I think is so helpful about your question is that we often assume that all is needed is to train people up in particular programs and practices. It's not to say that that kind of training and skills is not important, but if this isn't fundamentally a part of the education as you come to form your identity and develop your understanding of what justice is and what your job is as various professionals within the justice system, I think that makes it much more difficult for people to engage in it in a way that brings transformation. There are several law schools that now have courses on restorative justice. They're usually seminar courses and fairly small. I think there has been an increasing integration in terms of thinking about restorative justice as part of basic criminal law courses. I think that's still fairly minimal, but it is starting. I don't, to my knowledge, there's been some work in terms of the early RCMP engagement with community justice forums at the RCMP College, but less so in most of the policing programs. I do know that there's lots of engagement in judicial training and voluntary judicial education programs in terms of understanding it, but again, it's usually oriented to what's available under the criminal code rather than how do we think differently about the work of justice. What's been most promising in Nova Scotia has actually been the engagement of a restorative approach at elementary and high schools. Where it is quite transformational in terms of the expectations of what we ought to do when things go wrong, both for the children and the teachers involved in those institutions and for their parents. And so we have 106 schools in Nova Scotia that take a restorative approach on the everyday and to discipline, and they're starting to have some serious expectations of what it means to respond when something goes wrong in their community, in their schools, and beyond there. And that's causing some waves of change in terms of what should happen around shoplifting at the mall and what should happen in youth justice. And so I think that's another very important place to be investing in our education about how do we respond to one another when we've caused harm.
Merci. Senator, you wanted to add briefly? Yes, please.
I actually have my diploma in restorative justice and conflict resolution. I took it at University College of the North, and I graduated in 2006. The restorative justice program was developed by Indigenous lawyers who created the program, the restorative justice program, through an Indigenous lens. So it was talking about our history, about pre-contact, contact, colonization, but also how to implement restorative justice in today's society. But unfortunately, due to the lack of people going into the program, they had to cut that program. And the reason many times it had to do with funding, because, you know, when you go to get funding for post-secondary, it says, is it a job you can get once you complete? And then because restorative justice is so new, and like you said, half of the population don't know what it is, so then they couldn't advocate and say, yes, I can get a job here, here, and here. So then it becomes about funding to get to the program. So unfortunately, it was an excellent program, but it was cut. But that's what my background is in restorative justice.
Thank you. Sénatrice Pate.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for being here. As an early participant in what was termed the restorative justice, then transformative, and now it's reparative process, one of the challenges that many of us had is that while there were champions, things might go really well, but for most of the initiatives, they tended to actually expand the scope of social control of the criminal and social justice system, and make everybody feel better about more people going into the system rather than addressing the fundamental inequality, in particular with respect to poverty, racism, and sexism. And some of the early programs diverted off those charges that were harder to prove, like sexual assault and those sorts of things. So I'm really pleased, Jennifer, that you talked about early education, because one of the things that strikes me, and especially when we consider the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there are all kinds of other approaches that are far more transformative, if you will, in nature, that will prevent some of what that all of you have talked about as the end result. And so I'm curious as to how much you've been working in the areas of looking at these sorts of approaches as a fundamental way of raising children, of educating, of addressing poverty, because I haven't heard anybody actually talk about how you use this approach to do redistributive or restorative or transformative approaches to economic redistribution. So thank you.
Go first.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because it gives me an opportunity to wholeheartedly agree with you. I think in part, it's easier for me because the way that I approach restorative justice is to think about it as a relational approach to securing just relations, and that can't be the preserve or the work of the criminal justice system. In fact, it probably needs to not live here only. I think one of the things that's been interesting in Nova Scotia is that it was starting to think restoratively inside the criminal justice system that started to provoke and promote thinking about how do we become more proactive and preventative in terms of the way we secure better relationships and better interactions and address systemic and inequalities in terms of the rest of society. And so a restorative approach in terms of paying attention to those relationships and interconnections has spread far beyond the criminal justice system in Nova Scotia. That's also true for contexts like Leeds in the UK, that's adopted a child-friendly city, taking a restorative approach to thinking in integrated ways across the governance of an entire jurisdiction, and particularly around child welfare and child protection. That's also true in the city of Hull in the UK. New Zealand has done a significant amount of work around that. And there are several communities in Australia adopting that more wholesale approach to how is it that we think about all of those social services and social systems and structures that are fostering or harming just relations. I think we have to be, precisely, right? So as soon as you tap those inequalities, you have to address where is the access to the resources and the means to secure well-being and health and mental health services and poverty. So, I think we have to be very, very wary of assuming that we don't address the pipelines and the root causes and the issues that are ending up in our criminal justice system. And I think there is a fear that this gets used to make more palatable net widening in terms of the criminal justice system. And if we approach this without troubling the categories of the victim and the offender and who sits in what chair, if we see this as about mending the interpersonal harms rather than thinking about the social harms, we have to be very intentional to design restorative justice initiatives and interventions in ways that address collective and social responsibility for the structures and the systems and the circumstances that have resulted in this harm. And we have to do that not only in the criminal justice system, but in schools, in healthcare. We're engaged in an initiative in Nova Scotia right now, which is the first public inquiry to work in a restorative way that's fundamentally concerned with addressing systemic racism as it presented itself in the home for colored children over many decades of institutional abuse. And its primary focus has been to think about breaking down the silos of government to work in more integrated ways around human-centered social services to address poverty and inequality and racism.
Thank you. Mrs. Wimmers?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. Great question. I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to talk about vulnerable victims. And we've known for years that poverty is related to or increases one risk of violent victimization. And what do we do in terms of addressing the needs of victims and helping them heal? And that from a very young age, children already. I think that is important. And we know that victimization is a risk factor for future victimization. That's another thing that we have to address, multiple crime type victimization. And the cumulative impact of victimization on the individual, which to me highlights the importance of victim services, rehabilitation, healing of the victim. I think it's important to point out that categories such as victim and offender, they're not two distinct categories. Someone can be a victim at one moment and an offender at another, and I think that that's also important for us to bear in mind. We're not talking about two different worlds. And I think words such as healing of the individual are at the core of what we should be looking at in terms of our approach to dealing with these issues. So I think that when the notion of reparative justice was used, which is a needs-based approach, and you look at what are the needs of the individual in terms of healing, rehabilitation being another form of reparation, what do we need to, how can we address that? And again, the lack of services, and particularly in certain regions of Canada, northern Quebec in particular, in terms of victim support and other services, absence of compensation schemes across the country. These are worrying, because it means that we're not addressing these, the impact of victimization and leaving people vulnerable to the long-term consequences of that, and our society as well as the individuals.
Okay. Well, still have a few more senators on the list, and we're getting tight on time, but we're going to try to work in 4 people from the audience. I'll work in 2 now and 2 a little bit later. So we need to keep the questions brief, short, the answers brief, short, in order to get done. So first is Mo Royer, who's a mediator. Sir, you'd like to come to the microphone? Thank you.
I think it's important that you do have this committee if you really do want to work on something to resolve issues. I was a staff member at the Correctional Services of Canada for 20 years. And the last 10 years of my career in Corrections Canada, I met with the commissioner and regional commissioner and union president, national president of the union. And I asked them to support this initiative, which was, let's have mediation in our prison system. I ended up doing it for 10 years. I've mediated in Ontario institutions, in all of them, men and women. And one of the things that I think is important, I hope that you take in, is that people respect one another. And very often what happens, inmates and offenders don't respect one another and do not respect the administration, and vice versa. There is a way, and I won't take all the time here that I'd like to, but it's not always 100%, but I can assure you that I would not have been there for 10 years if it had not been as successful as it was. I'd be delighted to another day come back, but I must say, I also worked on 2 parliamentary committees, the McGuigan Committee and as well the Dobney Committee. They came out with a unanimous report because they worked together on finding changes. I hope you do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Royer. And next we have Jill Marak, who's from the Department of Justice.
My question is, are there crimes that are unsuitable for referral to a restorative process?
Okay. Professor Llewellyn.
So I'm going to say controversially no, but I think that the real answer is it depends. So I think that determining what sort of justice pathway is appropriate by virtue of the way our current criminal justice system categorizes harm and doesn't pay attention to the context, circumstances of particular crimes and harms does us a disservice. And so what I mean by that is not that all crimes should be diverted from the current system. I think we should be making much more careful decisions about when and how it is appropriate. But if a restorative approach is about attending to the context, causes, and circumstances and root causes of crime and harm, if it is about addressing and understanding the harm that's involved, there is no thing that qualifies as a crime in the public interest as about public safety that ought not to be considered through that lens. Does that mean that only one size fits all practice of offender-victim mediation or some other process is appropriate for all cases? No. Does it mean that we ought to be thinking this way about justice in all cases and looking for appropriate responses to do the right thing? Absolutely. And I think, we need to look no further than examples like the Restorative Public Inquiry for the Home for Colored Children around decades of institutional abuse, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and other responses to large-scale human rights abuses, where that orientation and response has been essential to finding the right pathway forward.
Respond to that? No?
Well,
Okay.
I believe that we could take on any offense, but like she said, it depends. Does the offender take responsibility? And through our Indigenous history, we did deal with our own people when they were unbalanced. But the issue that we have is that we have a barrier, and the barriers are the Crown attorneys. Because the Crown attorneys then determine which cases we can take. Even though we could be lobbying and the community could be saying, this is our community member, we want to take this case, this is a part of they're part of our community, it ultimately comes up to the Crown attorney if they're going to refer it or not.
Senator Deakin?
Thank you, and thank you so much, the five of you. It's really a high-impact morning, and it's so wonderful this has been a priority today. Especially today. I do come from the education background where restorative justice, my role was to make sure leaders were trained for over 15 years. And I think the point as I go into this question is it was hard work. And it was very hard work to set up the conditions for success. And the magic of that circle when you have the victim, the accused, their families, the criminal justice folks, police, probation officers, community services, is something that's really hard to replicate without seeing it and experiencing it, and the comfort that the relationship building and the work that has to be done. And I use that work because it's going to be part of my question. And so I thank you so much today. Senator Munson talked about getting sort of over the finish line. What I wonder about is something, Ryan, you said that I've been thinking about for a while that I can't empirically prove, but is that word momentum. And you said, I think we've lost some momentum here. I think it's not as prevalent in communities as it once was. And in order to look at crossing the line in some of these other conversations today, I would like to hear from you, because my perception is the same, that momentum is a challenge right now. Awareness, it was very, very respected and popular, I would say, or as a possibility to restore people 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Have we lost that momentum empirically, and how do we get it back?
Well, actually, when I got the email from Art Eggleton, it said 51% of Canadians weren't aware of what restorative justice is. To me, that indicated hope. To me, that indicated that there's room for change. There's room to educate people on what restorative justice is. I can't really speak to what restorative justice was a while ago, but from my observations, restorative justice can be beneficial. And sorry, can you rephrase your question? Just a quick paraphrase.
Certainly. Thank you. Ryan, just around that momentum piece,
yes.
That we, the sense is that we have lost, and in order to get over the finish line, in order to look at some of these barriers that we're talking about, in order to move forward, I think we have to understand that momentum piece at this moment.
It's all in a frame of reference. It's the viewpoint. It's the way we're seeing things. We're seeing restorative justice through a limited lens. We all have these lenses, these frames of reference. we're seeing criminal justice and restorative justice as two separate entities. They can be a single entity. They can be integrated together. There has been trends of when you speak of mandatory minimums, there's actually been a trend of increased mandatory minimums in the past, I don't know how many years, but I looked at some of the statistics. I remember there was 10 instances of mandatory minimums, and I looked at some more, it was like 72. So you could see a disproportionate increase in punitive measures, and I think that's what we have here is an increase of punitive measures, an increase of looking at the justice system through a lens of, well, historically penitentiary, like I said, was penance, right? Penance. So it's rooted in throwing people away, sort of. Just lock you in a cell and let you think about what the crime you did against the church. That's where penitentiary stemmed from. So we have to understand the origins of where we came from in order to understand where we are now. So like I said, 51% of Canadians, it's rooted in education. Where do we get that momentum from? We get that momentum from forums like this. We get the momentum from further discussion. We get that momentum from more advocates stepping forward. We get that momentum from actually implementing these practices. Once restorative justice kicks off, and we'll get to that finish line, but we have to take these first steps forward. That's what it takes. And for me, for changing my personal life around, all it took was that first step forward, and then the next step forward, and the next step forward. And I know a lot of times, oftentimes, I was scared. I was scared of change. I was scared of the way things look afterwards. I think Canada needs to embrace courage and go forward with this and realize and know that in my instance, we can replicate this across the board.
Okay, we need to move on. Senator Bernard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for organizing such a wonderful panel on a topic I think that's very critical. I know we're near the end, and I actually have two questions. I don't know if I'll get them in, so I think I'll start with this one. And I think I'll address this to my fellow Nova Scotian, Professor Llewellyn. I'm wondering how issues of power or abuse of power are addressed in restorative justice principles and practices. And before you respond, I'd like to just share a story, because you've mentioned with some excitement, it seems, that education and child welfare and so on are now using these practices. Just last week, my 12-year-old great-nephew was referred to using the N-word in his classroom by his teacher. His peers heard it, went immediately to their teacher, their homeroom teacher. She went immediately to the principal and the vice principal. They convened a restorative circle the next morning, and the teacher basically denied, said these students didn't hear what they heard. The students felt so overwhelmed by how quickly this had escalated that they said, well, maybe we didn't really hear it. And the teacher in this restorative meeting cried, brought in evidence that would suggest that she would never use such a word. These 12-year-old students heard the word. So to me, it's all about power and abuse of power. And what's meant to be a restorative approach has left my nephew and his mom feeling re-traumatized by the very act that was meant to resolve. And they're trapped. So enough about that as an example. To say in the conversation this morning, I haven't heard much about issues of power and abuse of power and how they impact restorative justice work. So I'd like to ask about that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the question, and the story makes me very sad, of course. You know, I think what the question raises is a really important point about the danger of instituting restorative practices and training people up in how it is that we just bring people together in a room and let them talk in better ways without understanding restorative justice as a broader movement to understand the context, the causes, and the circumstances for issues. So absolutely, I think we need to be much more attentive than we have seen much of the development in the movement be, and more attentive to the context in which restorative practices are used. So one of the examples I'd offer is one of the reasons to move away from seeing this as alternative dispute resolution and mediation for the criminal realm, where we just put parties together, and to insist that what is required is to look at the broader context, inequalities, issues of power, who else needs to be in the room to either even out the power in a particular process, or even, and more importantly, how we don't identify restorative justice with one process and one circle, but we see it rather as an approach to how is it that we are responding to issues. So in the example you gave, there ought to have been a much more significant consideration of who was coming in that room, of how people were prepared, of who needed to speak to who first, of what other relationships were at stake there. It's a fundamentally important response there by all of the classmates who heard that and were harmed by hearing that community needed to be able to respond other than just a defensive, did you say it, didn't you say it, and to understand what the impact was in terms of what they heard. One of the things I sort of point to is thinking in much more complex ways about how do we change the way the justice system works, not just to insert particular mediation processes between individuals, to pay strict attention to the context for those issues, how you prepare people, what the range of connected issues are, who needs to be in a room to have a conversation. And we are developing some knowledge about that in terms of more complex processes that disrupt this assumption that what restorative justice is putting an offender and a victim in a room together to be mediated by a neutral party. I think the response at the dental school at Dalhousie is an example of a much more complex process that was misrepresented by the press and by many who were outside that process. There's a long 90-page report that talks about it in a much more integrated, detailed steps. The restorative public inquiry is another process that tries to deal with power in those different ways. So I think you've raised a fundamentally important question that needs to shift us away from just deploying these practices as tools.
Senator, as we are short of time, I will ask Senator Sinclair to ask his question now, and if with your agreement, we will prolong for a few minutes this open caucus. So, Senator Sinclair.
Thank you very much, Senator. I want to commend all of you for being here and for your comments and for sharing your stories, and also want to thank those who've been given an opportunity to ask their questions. I just want to make a small observation, and it relates to the question from the representative from the Department of Justice as to whether there's any crime that's not capable of being referred to a reformative justice process. And it really does reflect, I think, the thinking that reformative justice does not engage incarceration, when in reality, a reformative justice approach could engage incarceration, and we must not forget that. The question that I have, though, relates to whether you're familiar with the approach and the impact of reformative justice in the nation of Norway, where Norway has the lowest incarceration rates in the world, has the lowest recidivism rates in the world, and they have a reformative justice principle that abides within their criminal justice system. And I just wondered if anyone had had an opportunity to look at their approach and why it appears to be so successful.
Anyone has?
Yes, I asked my professor about that. Scandinavian countries in particular, he tells us to avoid Scandinavian countries because predominantly the demographics there are similar. You have very similar demographics and very similar political structures that are able to address these things. That's what he told me. So that's the first thing that comes to mind when I heard that.
And I'd like to also add, what I don't know too much, but I do know that one point that I want is that wanted to point out was that they treat the offenders like humans.
Yeah, so I haven't spent time in Norway. I do know probably at a distance less well than you do, so maybe I should ask you to answer your own question. But I do know that part of what's really significant there is it's not seen as just a diversion once someone gets to the criminal justice system, but there is a very deliberate choice about how they perceive people who come into conflict with the law, how it is that they're looking at the wraparound services and responses. So they perceive conflict with the law through a social services lens in terms of the issues and the needs of those who are affected and those who are causing harm. And so before you get into the system and have to figure out how to divert people out, there's also a significant investment in different, more integrated human services in response to those that I think is making a fundamental difference. And so, I think that's a great place to leave this, which is restorative justice cannot simply be the work of the criminal justice system, right? It needs to be an orientation to the way we are caring for and nurturing just relations across all of our social systems and structures. And absolutely, there's an opportunity that we need to be taking more full advantage of when issues arise to the criminal justice system, but wouldn't it be better that we use that, we shrink the size of that and what work it's doing by addressing those issues much earlier in community and in the systems and structures that we have to take care of one another.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Eagleton, for the first time since I've been chairing with you, co-chairing this open caucus, I won't abide by your instructions. And I will ask 3 senators who wants to speak today before we conclude, before you have the last word today. Senators Monson, Senator Hu, and Senatrice Bellemare. Senator Monson, please. Mercer, I'm sorry.
I've already spoken. We don't even look alike.
Yeah.
But your name.
As I'd like to say, I'm the tall, good-looking one. But
You're too good-looking person, but Senator Monson, you have...
Thank you, Chair. And I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the contribution that Senator Eggleton has done to the Open Caucus since he became chair. This is a very unique thing that we're doing here. This is a unique thing in that this was a product of the Senate Liberal Caucus. We started this. We then, because it was successful, others wanted to see how it worked. The Independent Senators Group joined us in sponsorship, and then the government representatives in the Senate joined us. That is because of the leadership of Senator Eggleton. This has become I'm the most partisan person in the Senate, but this is the most nonpartisan meeting you'll ever be at in the Senate, and that's why I come every week when I'm in town. This is an important thing that Senator Eggleton has done, and I want to thank Senator Eggleton for his contribution, for his even hand, and his ability to attract others to the cause. This is a unique institution in the sense that we are all senators. Most of us around the table are senators. We come from different groups. From the Senate Liberal Caucus is for the Independent Senators Group, but we have had members from the Conservative Caucus here on occasion. But we've also had members of Parliament. We had one member of Parliament here this morning, and we've had members of the Conservative Party, the New Democratic Party, and the Liberal Party here on occasion to participate in this. That makes this a unique thing. Art, this is this is because of your even-handed method of recruiting people to be panelists, but also how this meeting is run, and the participation of the audience has also been very important. I'm going to miss you. You're my seatmate, so now I need a new seatmate. But I think we are all going to in this room today. We're going to miss you, and although I'm happy that Senator Cordy from Nova Scotia will take your place at the next in the next one of these sessions. But Art, thank you. Job well done.
Thank you.
Senator Wu.
Thank you, Senatrice Saint-Germain. You know, Open Caucus epitomizes what Senator Art Eggleton is all about. He comes to the Senate. He came to all of the important positions that he's held over his lifetime with an open caucus mindset. And by that, I mean he has an open mind, he has an open heart, and he has an open door. And the fact that we have so many colleagues from outside of our chamber participating in this event and in many previous Open Caucus events is a testament to his open mind, his open heart, and his desire to have an open door. But Open Caucus is also emblematic of the changes in the Senate, changes that continue to help our upper chamber evolve from a largely partisan institution to one that is less partisan, more independent. And even though Senator Eggleton has remained in the Independent Liberal Caucus, he has been one of the pillars and the drivers of the what I can call the independence movement in the Senate, and Open Caucus has been an important contributor to that movement. Senator Eggleton, let me reassure you that Open Caucus will continue to flourish, I'm sure, not just in the actual meetings that have been taking place on Wednesdays, but in the spirit of Open Caucus that has already infected the whole upper chamber, and I hope will continue to infect us in the best possible way. Thank you.
Sénatrice Bellemare.
Oui, merci, Madame Sénatrice Saint-Germain. Je voudrais prendre ce moment pour remercier le sénateur Eggleton pour tout le travail qu'il a mis et qu'il a fait dans l'organisation de ces caucus ouverts. En effet, ce caucus répond à des besoins bien particuliers, bien réels, de plusieurs des sénateurs qui ont ce goût de curiosité pour aller fouiller des dossiers et pour pouvoir ensuite les transmettre, ce qu'on dit, les remarques, ce qu'on trouve ici à travers des projets de loi, à travers des interpellations, dans une manière un petit peu plus sérieuse dans le cadre du Sénat. Ce caucus ouvert, en fait, permet d'avoir un contact plus réel aussi avec des Canadiens, des Canadiennes, et aussi nous permettre entre nous d'ouvrir les esprits d'une manière moins balisée par les comités, qui sont aussi un lieu ouvert. Et j'en profite peut-être juste pour un petit peu faire du chemin sur l'idée du sénateur Parr, parce qu'en effet, ces caucus se sont développés sur une plage horaire qui était anciennement occupée par les caucus partisans. Alors, plus de sénateurs qui ne participent pas à des caucus partisans, plus ce nombre augmente, plus on retrouve de sénateurs au caucus ouvert. Et c'est en effet une démonstration très claire des changements que l'on est en train de vivre dans cette institution. Alors, merci d'être là et surtout, merci au sénateur Eggleton, qui, lui, est un sénateur très curieux et qui le démontre en tout temps, autant dans les comités qu'en Chambre. Alors, merci beaucoup pour cette initiative.
Wow.
And now, Senator Eggleton.
Oh, do I get to speak? Well, my first thought is to apologize to the people that didn't get a chance to ask their questions. We ran overtime on this session, and we had a couple more people from the audience, a couple more senators, but it was such an enlightening session, I felt, with the kind of information we heard. And like all of the others, when I organized the very first of these open caucuses on significant national issues some 4 years ago, I've been saying all along, follow-up is important too. If we grasp upon a subject that needs our attention as senators, that needs to be handled in the Parliament of Canada in one way or another, then please move forward on these. Please move forward on on this whole issue of restorative justice. We've heard some terrific presentations from our panelists this morning. And I think what we can do for them and what we can do for the public and those people involved in the criminal justice system is to follow up in some way, and whether it's through a study in one of our committees or through legislation or through an inquiry, whatever. We've, over the years, dealt with a lot of different issues that are before they get into legislation, and we've helped to push them along that line. Some of the very key issues we've dealt with in the last few years, like medically assisted dying or cannabis, or you name it, any of the major ones, all sort of started discussions here so that people got better informed about the issues. So thanks for your kind comments. I have enjoyed immensely doing this open caucus, and know that it will continue, and you'll continue to follow up on all these issues that we have here. And as I retire later in this week, I'm going to miss it, but I'll keep following it. Hopefully you'll get on television soon and I'll be able to follow it. Thank you very much, everybody. Mark the gavel and adjourn the meeting.
So thank you to our panelists. Senator Eagleton, I hope you won't retire from the public space, because Canada needs again to hear your strong voice. Merci pour tout.
Okay. This meeting is adjourned.